Career Track presents How to Raise Happy, Confident Kids with Ed Bliss. In this program, you will learn ways of dealing with your children more effectively, ways of improving their behavior, resolving conflicts, improving their self-esteem, and strengthening the bond between you and them. Your presenter, Ed Bliss, is a well-known author and lecturer. While raising his own children, he developed a parent training program based on the principles that have been found most effective in child rearing, which in the years since has been of help to numerous parents. He developed this program with the aid of Dr. William E. Martin, head of the Department of Child Development at Purdue University, and with the aid of a number of psychologists, therapists, and counselors. And now, How to Raise Happy and Confident Kids with Ed Bliss.
Thank you. Thank you. How many of you folks have small preschool children in your family? Let's see a show of hands. Quite a number of you. How many of you have kids from kindergarten through 6th grade, those middle years? A few of those. Any parents of teenagers here? Oh yes, we have some of those. They're the ones that have the worried look on their face. I don't know why that is. Let's take the teenage problem first and get that out of the way. The problem of handling teenagers is very simple. Mark Twain had the answer to that one. He said, what you do is when a child turns 13, you put him in a barrel and you put a lid on it, you cut a hole in so that you can pass in food and water, and you leave them there until they turn 16. On their 16th birthday, you plug up the hole. I'm hoping we can come up with a few alternatives to that during the course of our presentation here. What are we going to be talking about? Let's be clear about one thing. I'm not going to try to give you my opinions about child rearing. I'm going to try to give you what I believe is the conventional wisdom, the things that the experts in the field, if you got them all together and had them work out kind of a prescription for raising children, I think these are the things that they would say. In other words, this is nothing new. These principles have been around for centuries in many cases, but they're things that either we're not aware of in many cases, or we give lip service to them. We don't realize how the things that we say to encourage a child are actually discouraging a child. So I think that you'll find that these are the things that are the fundamentals on which we're going to build our relationship with our kids. Let me say also that this is not just a matter of opinion. You know, some people think that how you raise your children, one person has one idea, another. Maybe the experts differ. They differ a lot less than you would think. There are 2 or 3 areas where they do have some differences of opinion, and we'll get into that. But 98% of it is across the board. But it has been demonstrated scientifically that these principles work. The largest study that I'm aware of the techniques of child rearing is one that was done a few years ago by Dr. Stanley Coopersmith. It was underwritten by the National Institutes of Mental Health. The federal government decided, let's put a few dollars in this thing and find out what works and what doesn't work in child rearing. And they took a large number of 5th grade boys. They wanted a very homogeneous group. They were all the same except in one thing, and that is the way in which they were reared, the way in which their parents reacted to them. Then they gave these kids every test you can think of. They interviewed each one of them individually. They interviewed their parents. They'd say to the child, if you did this, what would your dad or your mother say? How would they deal with it? They would talk to the parents and ask them the same question. How would you handle this situation? Then they talked to the teachers of these kids. Well, they got all this stuff together and fed it into the computer, and it demonstrated something which they had pretty well recognized already, but now they had absolute proof. And that is that there are 3 different ways of rearing children, and some are much more effective than the others. The least effective way in terms of self-esteem, and that's what we're going to be talking quite a bit about, is the child's self-esteem, how they feel about themselves, because that's really what determines their behavior. A child who has very low self-esteem is not going to try hard in school or in athletics or anything. He just kind of drifts. The child who has low self-esteem is easily manipulated by peer pressure. He's the one who is very much more likely to get into drugs and do a lot of other things that he shouldn't be into, rather than the child who has high self-esteem and figures, I'm in control of my life, I'm a pretty worthwhile person, and this is a pretty wonderful world, and I have my place in it. So self-esteem is what it's all about. The children with the lowest self-esteem in this study were those who were raised in very permissive homes, where either through a conscious decision or sometimes through neglect, the children were allowed to do things that they shouldn't have been allowed to do. They didn't have a feeling that there were boundaries, or if there were boundaries, they didn't mean anything because they weren't going to be enforced. The opposite end of the spectrum, children who were raised in a very authoritarian families, where, by gosh, I'm the father in this family, and I'm going to call the shots. I'm the king, you're my subjects. Now shape up. They were in the middle category as far as self-esteem was concerned. They had much higher self-esteem than the children from the permissive homes. But those who had the highest self-esteem were those who were reared in quite a different manner. And it was not a compromise halfway between the two. Not at all. It was a different approach, a different climate that was established in the home. And it involves a number of things. It involves being very firm in certain areas and being very flexible in certain other things. Above all, it involves respecting the child and letting the child know that he or she is respected as an individual, as a human being. It involves eliminating some of the self-defeating patterns of behavior that we drift into in working with our children. Let's talk about that. What are these self-defeating patterns? What are the techniques that we use to get kids to shape up, to make them do things differently than they're now doing? What are some of these techniques? Bribes. Okay, there's a very common one. Mary, if you'll do the dishes the way you're supposed to instead of sloughing off like you've been doing, I'll give you your allowance, or I'll let you go to that presentation you want to go to, or whatever. Okay, now, rewarding children for something is one thing. Bribery, let's define what we mean here by bribery. We mean paying a child in some way to do something that they should do without getting paid. Mary is old enough to help with the dishes. That's her responsibility. She doesn't need to get paid for doing the dishes any more than father or mother need to get paid for making the beds and fixing the meals and so forth. And in this connection, one of the questions I'm often asked is, what is my opinion about allowances? You know, every family handles it a little differently, and every age there's a little different problem, but I don't think an allowance should be tied to behavior. In other words, if you're shaping up, you're being a good kid, I'll give you your allowance. If you're not, if you don't make your bed, don't do the dishes and that, I'm going to cut off your allowance. That's a cheap shot, because you're trying to use this as leverage to force the child to do something that you want them to do. I think the reason that they make their bed or the reason they help with the dishes is because they're a member of this family. And they have responsibilities, and they have to learn that from a very early age. You don't pay people to do things that they're supposed to do because they are responsible members of the family. Okay, so that's one thing we want to avoid. What are some of the other things that we do?
Threat?
Yes?
Threatening?
Threats. Okay, if you don't do this, here's what I'm going to do. A lot of kids go through life just under a constant veil of threats of what's going to happen if they do this or what's going to happen if they don't. And so often those threats are kind of empty. You say, if this happens again, I'm going to take the car keys away from you. Well, it happens again. And the child says, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to do it. I promise it'll never happen again, so help me God. And just give me one more chance. And you say, well, I can see you've learned your lesson. And okay, we'll give you one more chance. But if it happens again, well, the child has learned that first threat was meaningless, and the second one probably will be too. Idle threats don't do any good. If you do make a threat, for heaven's sake, follow through. Don't threaten and not do it. One of the threats that people often use, and I think this is a kind of a cheap shot too, is the threat of abandoning a child, a small child, when they won't come with you when you're out shopping or something. You're in the shopping mall and little 5-year-old Jimmy wants to look at the toys in the window a little longer, and you say, no, we got to go home, and he doesn't come. So you say, all right, if you don't come, we're going to leave you. And he doesn't believe you. So you start walking off, and you get about 50 feet away, and suddenly he believes, hey, they really mean it. And he runs screaming after you, don't leave me, I'm coming. And this seems like just a simple little thing. It's worth a chuckle at the dinner table, no big deal. But stop and look at it from the child's point of view. Jimmy believes that you are going to abandon him. Why is he running screaming? Because he believes it finally. What does that do to him? He says to himself, here are these people who say I'm the greatest kid in the world and they love me and all that. They would actually abandon me, leave me all alone in this cold, cruel world. I don't know how to do anything. I don't know how to make a phone call. I don't know how to get food. They would just walk off and leave me. That's how much they love me. You know, this doesn't build security. So, you know, threats of that sort, it's not the way to go. There got to be better ways. What other techniques, self-defeating techniques do we have? Any others? Nagging. What's wrong with nagging? Well, what's wrong with nagging is that you are assuming the responsibility for your child's behavior when he or she should assume that responsibility themselves. Homework, for example. In a lot of families, homework is mom's problem or dad's problem. Every night they check, Jimmy, have you done your homework tonight? What's your assignment? How many pages have you got? Is it ready? Let me look it over. Well, that's fine. If you stand over them constantly, I guess you do get the homework done. But that child never learns one of the most important lessons in life, which is that he or she is responsible for their own behavior. And learning responsibility is a lot more important than learning the capitals of all the states or whatever that assignment was. That's the main thing you learn in school, is that you are responsible for your behavior and what's going to happen to you in life. And if you go through life just doing what somebody has prodded you into doing, you've learned the wrong lesson. Of course, you say, yes, but what if he doesn't get the homework? He might not pass the test, or he might get a lower grade, get a C instead of a B. That's right. That's what the grading system is all about, is to show the kid how he's doing. And one of the problems, he hasn't learned responsibility. He's going to get a lower grade. He's going to learn that there's a penalty, there's something involved here. And remember, those grades are not something that's going to be a blot on his life for the rest of eternity. I think we have to be willing to let our children go through some of these unpleasant experiences sometimes to teach them that they are responsible for their own behavior. A lot of parents feel that their primary job as a parent is to watch what their kids are doing and then criticize them for it. Tell them how it's going wrong. What's wrong with your behavior? Well, a certain amount of that is inevitable. I mean, we are coaches for our kids, and you know, a coach points out when something goes wrong and how to do it right. But the kind of criticism which is self-defeating is the kind that occurs in so many families where the child is kind of ignored. If he's doing okay, if he gets his homework in on time, nobody ever hears from the school, everything's fine, and nobody says a word. But as soon as he makes a mistake, then he's criticized. We are always looking for opportunities to criticize our kids. We seldom look for opportunities to praise them. We're going to talk a little bit more about this later, but I think a phrase that's really worth keeping in mind is that the job of a parent is to catch his or her kids doing something right. Kids need recognition for these little things they do right. And in so many cases, if they do something right, well, that's what they're supposed to do. You take it for granted, you don't say anything. If they do something wrong, you jump all over them. Criticism is a self-defeating pattern. Nobody's mentioned yet the one which is the most common method that we use, the number one thing for dealing with kids when they misbehave, which is punishing, okay, and spanking. Yeah, spanking, of course, is a variety of punishment. Let's talk about that for a moment, because this is the most basic of all. Punishment works in the short run. If a child knows that he is going to be given a hard spanking if he does a certain thing or doesn't do it, he's going to comply. In other words, if the punishment is certain. However, there's a price that you pay for punishment, and that is it builds up a lot of resentment. The child feels in so many cases that he or she has been unjustly punished. And it doesn't matter whether it's just or not. What matters is how the child feels. I mean, that's what it's all about. The reason you're punishing them is because you want to make them feel that they shouldn't have done it and they're going to have to do better in the future. So it's a matter of how they feel. The problem with punishment is this. Every time you punish a child, the punishment is either too mild or too severe, in the opinion of the child. You've got a little 4-year-old who, You've told him to stay out of the cookie jar. Well, he gets into the cookie jar and you catch him in the act, so you give him a spanking. Well, how hard do you spank him? If you didn't spank quite hard enough, he may cry a little bit, but he figures, what the heck, that didn't hurt very much and I got 3 cookies. That's a pretty good trade-off, you know? That's a good deal. That spanking didn't do any good. On the other hand, if it's too severe, and that is usually the case, in the opinion of the child, if the child feels it's too severe, then they feel, this isn't fair. Okay, I did misbehave, I did something wrong, but by golly, I mean, that much punishment, that's not fair. And so naturally, what is their feeling? Resentment, rebellion, sometimes just sheer hatred. I mean, sure, I'm not perfect, but my gosh, you took away my fire truck for the next 3 weeks. I mean, that's maybe 1 week, but gosh, that's terrible. And so they start looking around for other ways to misbehave. And so much misbehavior is simply an outgrowth of punishment. Now, you can't ignore a child when he does something that's unacceptable. There's got to be some consequence, but the difference between punishment and consequences is quite significant, and we're going to be talking about that. Punishment is where you're trying to hurt the child, trying to really rub his nose in it, make him feel bad. And you know, you don't make people feel good about themselves by making them feel bad. You make them feel responsible by letting them learn to accept the consequences of their misbehavior. For example, if a preschool child is drawn all over the wall with a crayon, okay, punishment would involve sending the child to stand in the corner for 45 minutes, or saying you don't get to go to that party, or things like this. Something that will either physically hurt the child, like a spanking, or hurt them emotionally, like depriving them of something very important. That's punishment. However, a consequence, a logical consequence of that misbehavior would be to give them a sponge and some soap and say, okay, you knew you shouldn't have done that. Now you've messed the wall up. Your job is to clean it up, so go to it. And they scrub, and it's a pretty hard job, and they suddenly realize, hey, this didn't pay. But they're doing something constructive. They're trying to make amends. They're trying to undo the damage that they did. And what a difference this makes psychologically. Now, maybe they can't. You know, sometimes maybe they use the magic marker, and that's a permanent mark on the wall. Okay, you at least let them do the best they can to try to get it off, and let them, you know, learn that lesson. And then maybe you're going to have to repaper the wall. Okay, this is going to cost some money, Jimmy, and you know that the toy you've been wanting, that basketball that we were going to get for you, we only have so much money, we're going to have to spend that money for wallpaper instead. Now, that's a logical consequence. That's not a punishment, that's an outgrowth of what he did. And it's related to it, and this is such a different thing. So this difference between punishment and consequences, I hope you can gather that. There are 2 kinds of consequences. Let's analyze that for just a moment. They're what we call natural consequences and logical consequences. Natural consequences are those consequences which occur when the parent does absolutely nothing. Nobody has to do anything, Mother Nature takes care of it. Logical consequences are those where the parent does have to step in and do something which fits in with the misbehavior. An example of a natural consequence. Mary has been told that she's old enough now that she's responsible for taking her lunch to school. Well, she goes off and forgets it. A natural consequence of that error would be that she doesn't have any lunch that day. Now, in other words, instead of Mother getting in the car and going down to school and making sure that Mary has her lunch, she just does nothing. And Mary learns that, hey, I'm hungry, I've got to borrow some money from somebody, or I've got to skip lunch, but whatever that penalty is, I can't get mad at anybody. I mean, I'm the one who goofed, and so that's just the way it is, and I'd better try to remember that from now on. That's a natural consequence. Mother does nothing. And this is the best way to learn. Let children learn from experience. So take another example. Little Jimmy wants to go outside and play, and it's a cold, blustery day. There's snow on the ground, but you decide it's okay to go out and play for a while. But you say, hey, don't forget to put your mittens on. It's 20 degrees out there. Well, he doesn't do it. He forgets. Okay, instead of Mother running out and putting those mittens on, a natural consequence would be for her to do nothing and let him get cold fingers. Now, if he goes out without his coat and is going to get pneumonia, then that's your problem. You own that problem. And so, of course, you would take some action there. But cold fingers are not going to do any damage to anybody. It's going to make him very uncomfortable. But that's his problem. That's not Mommy's problem. It's not Daddy's problem or anybody else's. And he's going to learn, hey, I've got to start thinking for myself and doing the things that I know I'm supposed to do, or there's a penalty involved. How many of you, here's another good example of natural consequence and why it works so well. How many of you have ever run out of gas? Let's see a show of hands. Okay, every person in the room. How many of you have run out of gas during the last couple of weeks? Last month? Nobody. Isn't that interesting? Something that happens to everybody, but it doesn't happen very often. It happens once or twice in a lifetime. Why? Because there's a natural consequence. You run out of gas, you're stranded on the side of the road, it's awkward and embarrassing, and you get mad at yourself. You can't get mad at anybody else. You can't get mad at your spouse, and there's no way out. You can't say, please God, give me just 5 more miles on this tank full and I'll never let it happen again. That doesn't work. God doesn't listen to that kind of a prayer. Okay, that's a natural consequence, and because of that, you just don't run out of gas. Okay, children can learn so many things that way by just leaving them alone and let them accept the unpleasant consequence. Okay, there are a number of other self-defeating patterns that we might mention. One of them is praise. Now, praise can be a very useful thing. It also can be a damaging thing. It's a matter of how it's given. Undeserved praise doesn't work as a means of controlling a child's behavior. Praise for something that is praiseworthy is another matter, and you've always got to be looking for opportunities to give valid praise. Take, for example, Jimmy comes home from school, he's in the 2nd grade, and he's drawn a picture of a cow, and he's a little unhappy because it's not a very good cow, and he knows that, and the teacher pointed that out, and several of the other kids did too. It's a pretty lousy cow. Well, you say, Johnny, don't feel so bad. You're a good artist. That's a fine cow. That's great. You're just doing fine. I think that's a beautiful cow. You're a potential Michelangelo. Okay, he knows this is a bunch of baloney. He knows there are a dozen other kids in the class who drew much more lifelike cows than he did. He knows that he is being manipulated by some phony praise, and this doesn't do any good. He feels worse than ever. And he also loses trust in you, because you're somebody who will tell him something just to make him feel good, whether it's true or not. It doesn't work. If you want to help him, you might find something nice that you can say about this picture and praise that. You might say, hey, I really like the colors you chose here. I've never seen a purple cow before. That's really interesting. Or you might say, this picture reminds me of a cow that my uncle used to have on the farm when we visited him. It looked just like that. I'm going to stick it up on the refrigerator. It brings back a lot of memories to me. The colors go so nice with the drapes over there. You know, little things like that. By golly, see, this is money in the bank. This is not phony. Those colors do go together, and he can feel good, even though he may know that's not perfect. He achieved something, and he got recognition for that. So always look for praise that you can legitimately give the child, rather than giving him a lot of phony baloney that is not going to be accepted. One of the other mistaken things that we do in trying to deal with the child is buck passing. You have a youngster who has really misbehaved, and you say, okay, when your father gets home, you're really going to get it. I'm going to have him administer a spanking to you. Don't do that, please, ever, ever, ever. If you're going to spank, and there are alternatives to spanking, but if you are going to spank a child, it should be right then, when the event occurs. It shouldn't be 2 hours later. 2 hours is an eternity in a child's life. By then, they've completely forgotten what the misbehavior was, and there's no relationship between the misbehavior and the punishment. And when you compound the problem by letting another person do the spank, I mean, Johnny told you off, sassed you or something, and so his father comes home from work feeling great, looking forward to sitting down and putting his arms around his kids and tussling with them and having some fun. And mother says, do you know what that boy did today? Let me just tell you. And suddenly you've got to say, well, Johnny, I love you and all that, but because I love you so much, now I've got to beat the heck out of you. I mean, it really is very confusing to a child. And this spanking in cold blood, I think, is absolutely wrong. And spanking by a person who was not involved in it. Let's talk for just a moment about spanking. I said there are some areas where there are differences of opinion among the experts, and this is one of them. Most experts in child rearing do not believe in spanking, but some of them do. There's one very popular book, Dare to Discipline, that came out several years ago. The author of that book is a psychologist who maintains that under certain circumstances, a spanking helps clear the air and it's appropriate. But let me assure you, he doesn't say spanking is the solution to all of our problems, or that it's one of the basic tools that's going to make a kid shape up. He says that there are some circumstances where it's justified, namely with very small children. I mean, we're talking primarily preschoolers here. It should be very rare, only on those occasions where it's, in other words, you never spank a child for not feeding the dog or for not getting his homework in on time, or stuff like that. He reserves it for those situations where the child is openly defiant. And that's a type of misbehavior that has to be dealt with somewhat dramatically. Where the child says, I don't care what you tell me to do, you can't make me do it, I'm not going to do it, or that kind of an attitude. I'm the boss here and I've got a chip on my shoulder, I just dare you to knock it off. He says in that kind of a situation where the child is deliberately misbehaving, in that kind of a confrontation with the parent, they need to know they can't get away with that. But I think that as we get into this, we're going to come up with some other alternatives. But that's one way of doing it. But it should be done then. You are the one whose shins were kicked, or he spit in your eye, or whatever it was, and you should react immediately. I think we pretty well covered the things that we shouldn't do. One more that maybe we should mention is lectures. What is a lecture? Well, a lecture is telling a child something that he or she already knows. You say, Jimmy, you've got to fasten your seatbelt. Now, how many times have I told you? Don't you know that if you don't fasten your seatbelt and I had to push on the brakes, suddenly you'd go through the windshield and you'd have a bloody head, and let me explain to you what concussion is all about, and you go through this lecture. That is just a waste of breath. Johnny knows what's going to happen. I mean, you've been through this lecture 99 times already. Every time he doesn't fasten his seatbelt, he has this same lecture that he has to listen to. And of course he tunes out and he resents it. And you're not getting cooperation in a situation like that. You've got to learn to act instead of trying to use words as a substitute for action. You've got to do something. With the seatbelt situation, for example, I think what I would say is, Jimmy, your seatbelt isn't fastened. Just making a statement. Now, you're not accusing him of being indifferent or careless or lazy, or there's no accusation. Just say, hey, your seatbelt's not fastened. And usually he'll fasten it. If he doesn't, if he is going to play a little game with you and say, by golly, I'm going to show you who's boss around here, then I would simply pull over to the side of the street and say, I'll wait. I don't want to drive with anybody in my car not having their seatbelt fastened, so I'll wait. And that settles it. Now, sometimes you get the kind of a power struggle going where he may sit there for a long time. That only happens when you have a very poor relationship, which has resulted from these kind of self-defeating patterns that we've been talking about. Once he learns that you mean business, I think you have to do that once in a lifetime. That's no big deal. So act instead of using words and lectures and preaching to a child. Take the action which is necessary. One of the things that can be very helpful in dealing with misbehavior is to recognize that there are 4 basic motivations for misbehavior. And some of you are familiar with these. The famous psychiatrist, Dr. Rudolf Dreikurs, has developed this approach, and it's been adopted by most of the people in the field these days. Number 1 is the attention-getting mechanism, the desire for attention. We all like to be noticed. I mean, why do we dress nicely? Why do we do so many of the things that we do? We like to be noticed. It's one of the built-in traits in human nature to want to be noticed. Well, what if you're a child? You don't have any great skills that can make you noticed. You're not a great football player or musician or athlete or anything. In fact, you're just one of a whole bunch of kids in a schoolroom, or a bunch of kids in the family. How can you get noticed? Well, of course you could get noticed by doing something outstanding, but you don't know how to do something outstanding, or you'd think you couldn't. So you've got to have that attention somehow. So you do something that will get attention, that will cause the people around you, your parents and your teacher, other people, to notice you. It may be making a silly noise, or it may be acting silly. It might be a lot of different things, but whatever it is, it causes people to notice you. Now, when they notice you, you feel good. However, very often that will get a negative response. The parent will say, Jimmy, will you stop making that noise with your teeth, or whatever it is. You say to yourself, well, nobody wants negative attention. By saying that, I'm decreasing the chance that he'll do that. But it doesn't work. And why doesn't it work? Because negative attention is better than no attention. And as long as a child learns that he can get your attention by misbehavior, by whining, by pitching a fit, by whatever, he's going to do it. So how do you deal with that? Well, you deal with it by withdrawing your attention, by not giving attention to this kind of behavior. The little 3-year-old who comes up and starts annoying you every time you get on the telephone. What's he doing? He's concerned that somebody else is getting your attention. He doesn't like that. He wants your attention, 100% of it. And he's learned that if he keeps pestering you and pulling on your dress long enough, you'll eventually stop it and quit doing that. Well, you say to yourself, that's no big deal. I haven't given him much. Oh, yes, you have. You've given him attention, and that is what he was after. One of the lessons that we have to learn in dealing with kids is that children's behavior is purposeful. If a child continues doing something, he or she is getting something out of it. It's satisfying a need, a purpose. And that little scolding that you give Johnny 20 times a day, that's what he's after, because this gives him a sense of importance because he's getting your attention. So how do you deal with it? You simply ignore him. Now, that's easier said than done. Let's grant that. Maybe you can't ignore him. Maybe he's so insistent with his whining or whatever it is that you just can't ignore it. It's starting to get to you. In that case, there's a very simple technique that will work every time. We call it the bathroom technique. You just say, Jimmy, I'm sorry, you've got to excuse me for a minute. I got to go to the bathroom. And you just disappear. Well, what can he do? You haven't scolded him, you haven't lectured him, you haven't done anything. And he learns from experience that when he begins this whining or this unacceptable behavior, it's not going to work. And what does happen is something that he's not after, which is, goodbye, Mommy. I mean, that's not what he's trying to get. The second of our motivations is what we call the power struggle. We all like not only to be noticed, but to have power, to have influence on other people. And so this is the second of our motivations, this desire for power over others. And a child can get this power by refusing to do what you want. You say, I want you to do this. You say, I'm not going to do it. It's a challenge. It's a power struggle. You're at loggerheads. And yes, you will. No, I won't. You back and forth. Eventually, usually the parent wins. Well, here again, the child has accomplished something. He at least he's had your undivided attention. He's made you stop what you were doing. He's demonstrated his independence. He feels that he's got something out of this. This is not a constructive way of demonstrating power, but it's all he can think of. So when he does that, when you get into a power struggle and you finally win the power struggle by sheer force, because you're bigger than he is, and you say, you're going to lose and I'm going to win, then you punish him. And this results in our third motivation for misbehavior, which is revenge. Every time you punish a child, if it's serious enough to do any good, it's serious enough to make him want to get revenge. Nobody likes to be put down, and they naturally say to themselves, okay, I lost that round, but the fight's not over yet. What can I do now to get even? And by the way, these things we're talking about, we're not talking about 2-year-olds or 18-year-olds. It's across the board. The principles apply with teenagers or preschoolers or at any age. The same thing, this desire to get revenge for what is perceived as too severe punishment. When I say that punishment is too severe, let me give you an illustration which I think demonstrates why punishment always backfires. And it also illustrates the difference between a penalty and punishment. In football, we have penalties. If you break the rules and step offside before the ball is snapped, there's a penalty. The penalty is 5 yards. Well, nobody gets mad at that. I mean, that's the way the game's played. That's just the standard operating procedure. But suppose that you're the referee of a football game and you say, look, this system that's been set up isn't really very fair. I'm going to use a fairer system in this game, which I'm in charge of, and I'm going to make the punishment fit the crime. After an infraction occurs, I'm going to decide what would be an appropriate punishment. And I'm completely neutral, I'm not biased, I'm going to be perfectly fair with you guys, so you won't need to worry. Okay, so somebody steps out of bounds or steps off sides, and you say, well, you weren't very far off. Let's make that a 3-yard penalty. The next time it occurs, he was off quite a bit more, and he did it once before. He should have learned his lesson. Let's make that, let's say 13 yards, about right on that. The next time an infraction occurs, well, that was a rather serious infraction. I think I'm going to let you sit out the next quarter, like in hockey. I'm not going to let you play the next quarter. Okay, you go through the game, all these very fair punishments. Within about 5 minutes into the game, every person on both teams and every person in the stands is going to be mad at you because they don't agree with you. As you know, all this stuff that you've come up with, that's your opinion. Well, their opinion, it shouldn't have been 17 yards. 13 would have been adequate. You know, this sort of stuff. That's exactly the situation that we as parents are in every day. If we're trying to operate the way so many of us do, and that is after an infraction occurs, we try to figure out a fair punishment. And it's never fair in the eyes of the person being punished. So they want to get revenge. So how do they do it? Well, sometimes it will be open rebellion. Maybe if it's a teenager, they'll leave home or start drinking or using pot or get pregnant. There are a lot of different ways you can kind of get even and assert your supremacy over the person who's punishing you. You may be totally unaware of what's going on. Jimmy decides that you're not being fair with him. Well, he'll steal something out of your purse or do something else that you're not aware of. Go off and get involved in some unacceptable activity. So, you know, there are a lot of, I think a very large percentage of the misbehavior of kids is a result of this syndrome that we're talking about here. Trying to get revenge against parents or against the system for things which they perceive as unfair because they've been punished by someone who is trying to be very fair and decent. The fourth of our motivations for misbehavior is a little different than the other three, and it's the most difficult one to deal with, and it is what we call withdrawal, where a child decides to just give up. Their self-esteem is so low, they figure everybody else in the world seems to be superior to me. I'm not reading as well as the other kids in the class, and I'm not a very good baseball player, and I'm not very good looking, and my parents are always telling me about what a slob I am and everything, and what the heck, why fight it? So they just give up. Now sometimes these children are very well behaved. They'll sit quietly in the back of the classroom, never make a noise, never disturb anybody. They might get their homework in on time and so on, but they're afraid to risk. They're afraid to stick their neck out. They're afraid to interact with anybody because they might be rejected, and it just isn't worth risking possible rejection or possible failure. Why try out for the school play? I might not make it. So they just won't reach out and take risk in life. The way you have to deal with this is through encouragement. And it's got to be valid encouragement. You've got to find things that they are able to do. I don't care what it is. Maybe they're terrible in everything else, but they're awfully good at chess or anything, you know. Find things that you can encourage them and try to build on these strengths so that they begin to get a better self-image. Let's talk for just a moment about encouragement and discouragement. We know that we should try to encourage our children, but so often the words we use convey the wrong message. We look at the job that Jimmy has done and we say, well, Jimmy, you can do better than this. You've got a great potential in math and you're just not living up to it. I'm sure you can do better than this. So you're trying to encourage them. Well, telling somebody that they have a lot of potential is not encouraging. I remember quite clearly several years ago, one of my favorite philosophers, Charlie Brown, said in one of his cartoon strips, you know, somebody told him, the teacher said he had a great potential. He said, there is no heavier burden than a great potential. And there's a lot of truth in that. Having a potential is another way of saying, you aren't doing very well. You could do better, but you're not doing better. That's discouraging, not encouraging. Encouraging is saying, you usually do quite well in this particular area. In this particular case, you haven't lived up to expectations. Here's where you let me down. Anytime you can say that, anytime you can say to a child who is misbehaving, for example, if you say, Jimmy, this isn't like you, what are you saying? You're saying, you're a good kid. Usually I can depend on you. You're somebody that always comes through. But in this case, by golly, you didn't. What are you doing there? You're criticizing the behavior rather than the child. And that is so important. Whenever you give criticism, make sure you focus on the behavior rather than on the child. You're complimenting him as a person. You're a good person, no question about that. But this behavior was not good. And when you praise, it's a good idea, always to do exactly the same thing. Try to praise the behavior rather than the child. Because when you start giving generic praise, it begins to be insincere and it begins to sound insincere. But when you say, you did a good job on this. You know, see, anytime you can focus on a specific behavior rather than on the generic situation, this is much better, with criticism and with praise. Let's talk now about emotional feedback, which is a term some of you are familiar with. Some of you are familiar with the concept under different terminology. Some people refer to it as reflective listening, active listening. To give credit where credit is due, this concept was developed by the famous psychologist Dr. Tom Gordon, who founded the parent effectiveness training courses a number of years ago. And it's been adopted by just about everybody in the field of interacting with people because it's such a sound concept. It's the first thing they teach you if you take a course in counseling. It involves reflecting to the person that you're talking to, whether it's a child or anyone else, reflecting to them what you're hearing, what you feel are the emotions that are behind what they're saying, instead of arguing with them or giving them answers, telling them the solution to their problem. The kid comes to you and says, I hate school. It's a lousy place and the teachers are all mean. Instead of getting into a discussion of how nice the teachers are and they've had a lot of training and you shouldn't feel that way and maybe it's your fault, you know, all these arguments. If you're going to use emotional feedback, you'll say, now wait a minute, I'm going to keep my mouth shut for a moment, and now I'm going to try to figure out what emotion is my child feeling. She says she hates school. She says that it's a dumb place and the teachers aren't very understanding. This is probably covering up something, and I have no idea what it is. So instead of trying to solve the problem and argue with her, I'm going to feed back to her what emotion I feel. So what you would do is say, well, Mary, you sound like you're really upset. Yeah, I really am. You sound like your relationship with your teacher isn't very good right now. Yeah, that's right. And you feel that maybe you've been treated unfairly. Yeah, well, she made me stand up in front of the class and do this. And, you know, she starts telling you what is really underlying this problem, which would not come out in so many cases if you didn't use this feedback technique. Let me give you an example of what I'm talking about from my own life. Many years ago when one of my sons, Roger, was in about the second grade, we were in the Indian Guide program, YMCA Indian Guides, which is a great program for first, second, and third grade boys. They have a similar program for girls now, Indian Princesses, I think they call it. Anyway, every Tuesday night we would get dressed up in our little fancy costumes and our headdress, and boy, I'm glad I'm out of that now. Actually, it was a lot of fun. The kids love it. At that age, they just love costumes and the ritual, you know, and all that sort of thing. And the dads get a great kick out of it too. So one night we were getting ready to go. It was about 10 minutes to 7. It was almost time to go. And I said, hurry up and get dressed. Well, he was almost dressed. And suddenly he said, well, I don't want to go tonight. And I said, what do you mean you don't want to go? Come on, let's go. He said, I don't want to go to Indian Guides. He said, it's dumb. And well, my inclination was to say, what are you talking about? I mean, you get your costume and get in the car and let's go. But then I thought, Ed, why don't you practice what you preach? And I caught myself just in time. And I said, well, Roger, it sounds like you're pretty unhappy about Indian Guides. Yeah, I'm getting too old for that. And I don't want to be in it anymore. Well, instead of arguing with him, I forced myself to say, well, it sounds like Indian Guides has really been kind of a disappointment to you. You're kind of unhappy about it. You see, I'm just feeding back what, I don't know what's going on. And I'm not guessing or anything. I'm just trying to feed back the emotion and see what happens. And he said, yeah, that's right. It's no good. And besides, some of the dads are kind of mean. And I said, oh, some of them are treating you kind of rough, huh? Yeah, Mr. Johnson is, well, it took about, I don't know, 5 minutes, but what had happened was the previous week I'd been out of town. He had gone with the group, and they were back about 10 of them in the back of a station wagon, and they'd been rambunctious. And Mr. Johnson had turned around and really lowered the boom on them. I don't know just what he said or did, but I'm sure that Roger was the ringleader of whatever mischief they were getting into, and he must have really come down hard on Roger. Well, Roger was afraid to face this guy. I mean, this is a great big 200-pound football player and a very abrasive guy and a voice like a bull elephant. And Roger was afraid to face him after whatever it was that he had done. Well, he never would have told me that in a million years because he was embarrassed about it. And if I tried to pry it out of him, he wouldn't have told me. But I didn't try to pry it out. I just fed back to him what I was hearing, and he volunteered this information. Once he got it all out and told me about it, then I could say, oh, well, I know how you must feel. Mr. Johnson is really a pretty tough guy, and he kind of loses his temper, doesn't he? Yeah, that he sure does. Everything was fine now. It's just like suddenly like the sun had come out from behind a cloud. He was perfectly happy. We went to the meeting, and everything was rosy. This happens over and over again in a child's life, where things bother them, and they won't tell the parent because they're embarrassed, or they don't want to discuss it, or they're afraid you're going to give them a lecture, or you might punish them, or something like that. If you can force yourself not to step in those situations where the child has a problem. See, now this is not where you're at loggerheads. We're talking about a different situation here. We're talking about when the child owns the problem. Something's bothering you, you don't know what it is. You can't pry it out of them, but you can get it out of them by this feedback technique, this active listening or emotional feedback. Let's talk now about sibling rivalry. What happens when your kids are having a fight? Usually what happens is this. Little Susan, who's 5 years old, comes running into Daddy and says, Daddy, Jimmy is hitting me. Make him stop it. And so Daddy goes in. And Jimmy, what's going on here? You're 9 years old. Susie's only 5. You should be ashamed of yourself hitting a little girl like that. And he says, well, she took my toy. Yeah, well, nevertheless, that's not a good enough excuse. And you come down pretty hard on Jimmy, give him a tongue lashing or maybe some punishment or something. Analyze what's happened here. You know, you think, by golly, Jimmy was at fault and I've straightened him out and things should be better now. But they aren't better, because a few minutes later you have another fuss. And day after day after day, these two are at each other all the time. The problem being, you're not aware of what's really going on. What's going on is Susie, the little one, is the one who is at the root of this thing. We always take the part of the smaller child. Because they're 5 years old. She's helpless and defenseless. She doesn't have the skills and knowledge and everything that Jimmy has. He's 9. He's smarter and he should know better and so forth. You always step in and take the part of the younger child. Well, while you're giving Jimmy this tongue lashing, Susie is just sitting there having a ball. I mean, she's loving every minute of that. She's helpless. She doesn't have all the things going for him that Jimmy has, except one thing. She has a hydrogen bomb, which is named Daddy or Mommy, as the case may be. And all she has to do to detonate this bomb is to come in crying and say, he hit me. And then She can sit back, and she might continue crying, but she's enjoying it. She's loving it. And this is such a standard pattern in so many families where the younger child is always getting hurt. And you know, Susie can't run in and say, he's hitting me, unless he does hit her. So she looks around, what can I do to get Jimmy to hit me? And so she takes his drawing, or she marks on his paper, or, you know, anything, any little thing that'll get his back up so he does something to her. Now she can go and tattle. And it works. And that's why she continues doing it, why they both continue. Okay, how do you deal with this kind of a problem? The way you deal with it is not taking either child's side. You don't get involved. Don't get involved in fights between your kids. If they're having a fight or an argument, stay out of it. Let them work it out themselves. Usually they can. Now, in this kind of a situation, if Susie comes in to Daddy, you know, I want you to step in and solve my problem for me, I think Daddy should say, well, he shouldn't have done that, and I'm sorry. Why don't you go and play somewhere else and he won't bother you? Well, that's not what she wanted. She wanted to see him get the axe, and after she learns that it won't work, she'll quit doing it. It's very important to put kids in the same boat when a controversy does arise and you have to step in. In other words, let's face it, there are times when you will have to step in. You want to do it without taking sides, without giving either party the satisfaction of having you lower the boom on the other one. If one kid is hitting the other on the head with something that's big enough to cause some damage and you've got to do something, then I think the thing to do is step in, say, look, you guys are causing too much problem, too much noise here, I can't stand it, I want you to separate. And Jimmy, you go to your room, and Johnny, you go to yours, or okay, split them up. Mary and Evelyn are having a battle about who gets to watch which television program. They both want to watch it at the same time, and they have different feelings. Well, a lot of parents will say, well, Mary, you got to pick yesterday. Evelyn, it's your turn today. Look, that's not your problem. That's their problem. I think what you do is run over and turn off the set and say, look, if you girls can work something out, fine. If you can't, the set stays off. It's not up to you to figure out who had the last turn or how the thing is going to be solved. Stay out of fights. And when you do have to get involved, put them all in the same boat rather than getting involved with them. Something that can be very helpful in dealing with your kids, and this is one of the things I feel most strongly about, with something we haven't mentioned yet, is something that some of you have tried and probably hasn't worked because you haven't done it quite right. That is what I call a family council. A family meeting. I think it's a good idea to have a family meeting once a week. When a child is about 3 years old, I think it's a good time to start this. And it can be very brief. It can be just 3 or 4 minutes. It can deal with some very trivial matters. Trivial things like who's going to feed the dog this week, and you know, that sort of thing. But the purpose of the family council is not so much to solve problems as it is to change the atmosphere of the family, so that children have a sounding board. They have a weekly meeting that they're going to be able to speak up and get a few gripes off their chest, where some assignments are going to be made perhaps for chores, but they're going to have some say in what those assignments will be. It gives their life some structure too. Instead of just playing it by ear every day from day to day, you have a weekly time when everybody can get together and work out the problems that concern all of them. But it's so important that you do this the right way. This third method that we've been talking about, the alternative to permissive and authoritarian, some people refer to it as the authoritative approach. Other people refer to it as the democratic approach. Well, democratic, to many people that means majority rule. That is not the kind of a democratic approach that I'm talking about. I don't believe in having a family meeting and taking a vote on where we're going for our vacation next summer, or who's going to have which chore or anything like that. You don't ever want to take a vote. And you also don't want to issue ultimatums. You don't want to say, I'm in charge. You know, in other words, I'm the king here and you're the peasants. And I mean, it doesn't work at all if it's that way. But if it's really democratic in the sense that everybody gets their say, they don't get their way, but they get their say. And they're consulted on the things that affect everybody. Okay, now you don't want to have a family council to work out problems that have arisen between one parent and one child. If some problem is bothering Susie and she's having a conflict with mother, they should work that out on their own. You don't discuss that in family council. This is a place where you discuss things that affect the family. The rules are very important, but when you start out, there are no rules. The only rule is we don't have any rules. We're going to just do this the way we all want to do it. It's going to be up to you kids. We're going to try to get consensus on everything, and this is so important that you get consensus rather than taking a vote. By consensus, we mean unanimous agreement. And you think to yourself, well, that's not practical. I mean, unanimous agreement. Believe me, you can get it every time. You're trying to figure out, should we go to the lake next weekend or should we go to the mountains? Well, two of you want to go to the lake and 3 want to go to the mountains, okay? Don't go to the mountains for that reason. Instead, say, well, look, we can't agree on this. Let's talk about it some more. Maybe if we did go to the mountains on the condition that our next outing we will go to the lake. Would that be okay with you, Susie? How about you, Mary? Could you go along with that? It's amazing to watch what happens when they start thinking, hey, how can we got an impasse here, how can we get out of it? And they'll come up with ideas that you never would have dreamed of. Believe me, they will. And then when they get agreement, everybody is committed to it. Nobody's mad at anybody. Nobody totally got their way, but you've negotiated something which is acceptable to everybody, and the whole atmosphere of the family changes. I believe that the meeting should be held on a weekly basis, but here again, I don't think you should say, we're going to have a meeting on a weekly basis. I think you should say, here's an idea I've heard about, and would you guys like to give it a try? And they'll say, yeah. Okay, one of the first things we've got to decide is how often we're going to meet. Now, you can get all these things by suggesting them, but you just throw them out as suggestions and say, you know, what do you think? It's very important in a family council that the parent not preside. In other words, I think you should rotate the chairmanship, the chairpersonship, if you prefer, because this symbolizes to the kids that you really mean it when you say, hey, we're all equals. Equals in the sense that we're all human beings. We're not all equal in our responsibilities. Daddy and mommy have certain responsibilities that you kids don't, of course, and older children have different responsibilities, but we're all equal in the sense that we are all equal citizens. My vote counts just as much as the vote of the President of the United States. We're equal in that sense. You're probably saying to yourself, well, wait a minute, you're talking about starting as young as 3 or 4 years old. What can a little 4-year-old do as in chairing a meeting? Well, sure, Susie's only 4, but all it involves is deciding who gets to talk next. And, you know, if I have something I want to say, I say, Susie, I've got a couple of ideas on that. Can I explain them? And Susie says, yes, Daddy, you can go ahead. She feels so proud. Gosh, she's important. I mean, this really matters to her. She was the person in charge of the meeting. So rotate the chairpersonship and let them decide what the rotation will be. You know, you could do it alphabetically or by age. And you're thinking, well, this is a trivial, piddling little thing. What difference does it make? It makes a big difference to those kids. And it symbolizes that you really mean it. You're letting them have some say in things that matter to them. Another of the rules that you'll probably want to establish is that any of the rules can be changed as often as the group wants. But when a rule is set, it's in effect until the next week. And, you know, it may be quite awkward, and they're going to come up with some dumb ideas. That's okay. Let them do it. Don't veto anything. Never. I mean, that's not your privilege to veto something. Of course, everybody has a chance to veto something in the sense that you can make a unanimous agreement. But when you realize they're about to do something which is probably not going to work, that's okay. Let them try it for a week. It won't hurt. And then you can change it next week. This gives kids a feeling of responsibility. Gives them a feeling that they matter, that you respect them, that you value them. Now, what about people who don't want to sit in on a family meeting? Maybe your spouse doesn't think this is a great idea. Well, after a couple of weeks, your spouse is going to realize that he or she is missing out on something pretty valuable. The kids might resist this, especially teenagers, when you first bring it up, because it sounds kind of corny. I guarantee once you've done it for 2 or 3 weeks, they'll love it, especially if you do it the way I've suggested. And let it be really an opportunity to solve problems and not an opportunity to lecture the kids. One of the things that you should give a lot of thought to, though, you don't want it to be just a gripe session. The gripes are important. It's a place where you can get those gripes out in the open and solve problems and so on. But I think it's a good idea to start off with something positive. For example, I would try to start off by saying, Becky, before we get started here, I'd just like to say a couple of things. We talked last week about people leaving their bikes out overnight. and you all agreed you were going to stop doing it. Well, this past week, it only happened twice. That's a lot better than it had been. It's not perfect. We got a way to go on that, but it's much better than it was previously, and I just want to thank everybody. You've been very cooperative, and I know you're trying, and I just want you to know I appreciate it. Just something positive like that to start off with sets a different tone. It's hard to be mad at somebody when you've just been complimented on what a nice job you've been doing on something. One more thing, keep minutes. This is very important. Keep minutes of your family council. I think it should be very brief. I mean, now the kinds of things you're going to be talking about are who does which chore, what are we going to do about people leaving the cap off the toothpaste, you know, little trivial things like that. Again, let me emphasize, what we're concerned with is not the problem we're solving, it's the procedure that we're setting up and the climate being changed. Okay, these little things, you want to make a written record of what was decided. Who should keep that record? Well, I think this also should be rotated. I think it's a good idea to suggest to the group that we have a different person take notes, take minutes every day. Now, at what age? Well, a second grader can write well enough to take adequate notes for the kind of thing we're talking about, which is maybe just a list of things. Okay, family council. A lot of people really stifle their children when it comes to expressing emotions. I think we need to encourage our children to be forthright, to express their anger, their fears, their resentments, their frustrations. Get them to talk to us. It's a very difficult thing to do for a lot of kids. They don't know how to put their feelings in motion, and by the way, the emotional feedback technique can be very helpful here. Let me give you an example of one little instance that occurred in my family where one of my kids was able to express himself to great advantage. When Roger was in the second grade, he saw an ad in a Sears catalog for a safari kit, which cost $4.98. And the description was glowing. I mean, this safari kit, you had a machete, you had a pith helmet, you had binoculars and compass and everything you could want for, you know, spending a few months in the jungle. And only $4.98. Well, he was elated. So he started saving his money. And took him quite a while on his limited allowance. But he finally saved up the money for this, and he sent off for it. When it came, it was a big disappointment. It was a bunch of junk that had been thrown together, and well, you can imagine, for $4.98, it wasn't going to be very great. The binoculars were plain glass, and the compass didn't work, and the pith helmet was just thin plastic, which broke the first time he tried it on, and he was devastated. I mean, he was not just annoyed or unhappy, he was devastated. And he sat down and started crying. Well, my immediate reaction was, by gosh, they can't do this to my kid. I'm going to write and get his money back. That's the least I can do. I was about to do it, and I just caught myself in time when I said, wait a minute, who owns this problem? You don't own the problem. This is Roger's problem. You're not crying. He's the one who's crying. Practice what you preach, Ed. And so I caught myself in time, and I said, Roger, you can get your money back. You don't need to worry about that. But I said, you're going to have to ask for it. They don't know that you don't like this unless you let them know. And he said, well, what do you mean? I said, well, you've got to write them a letter. I said, you've been learning in school how to write letters. And so this is what it's all about. You've got to write to Sears and tell them that you're unhappy. Or, you know, he said, okay. He said, what shall I say? I said, I don't know. Just tell them how you feel. So he said, okay. So he went off into his room and closed the door. He was in there for about 45 minutes. And I thought, boy, I hope he has enough paper. This is going to be quite a letter. Well, when he brought it out, it was a very simple letter, one page, one sentence, as a matter of fact. And I could tell it was going to be kind of unusual when I read the salutation. The spelling, of course, was very unusual, but you could make out what he was saying. The salutation was, "Dear neurotic nitwits." I don't know where he picked up that phrase, but I'm sure it got their attention at Sears. The letter itself was just one sentence. It said, I hated your lousy, dumb, stupid, no good safari kit, period. That was it. And then he closed the letter the way he had been taught in the second grade. He signed it, Love, Roger. I made a copy of that before I sent it off with a covering letter. I still have that copy. It's something I get out every few years and chuckle about. Well, About 10 days later, Roger got a letter from the vice president of Sears. And they returned his money, and they sent him a letter. It was not a form letter. They didn't have a form letter for neurotic nitwit letters. It was a very nice letter. And also enclosed was a set of Matchbox racing cars. So he was very pleased. He sat down and wrote a letter. Dear Mr. Abernathy, I got the Matchbox cars. I like them. You are a very nice man. It must have cost $8. Love, Roger. Well, you know, I think Roger learned something from that. He learned to express himself. He learned to solve his own problem, which I could have solved so easily for him. Really, you're not doing your kids a favor when you solve their problems for them. Well, of course, there are times when you may have to step in, but you step in these situations so often, it just doesn't do any good. It backfires. Letting the child solve the problem themselves, what are the solutions? I think you need to talk to them about it. You need to give some emotional feedback and listen to them and see it from their viewpoint and make any suggestions that you have. Well, Susie, if this older girl is giving you a bad time, what are your alternatives? What could you do? And she may say, well, I could go and play with somebody else. Maybe I could play on a different part of the playground. Maybe I could share something with her and make her a friend. You know, it doesn't make much difference what the answer is you come up with. But she's beginning to say to herself, here's a problem, and I've got to figure out myself, what are the alternatives? Maybe the alternative is just to stay away from that person. Okay, that's the way life is. Sometimes we have to avoid these situations. And it's so hard when children are fussing or fighting, whether it's your own kids or whether it's kids outside the family. It's so hard to stay aloof from that. But as a general rule, you should. One of the common problems, people so often ask me, what do you do about a child that tattles all the time? A child that tattles all the time is a child that has learned that the way to solve a problem is tattle. Anytime somebody does something you don't like, you go and tell the teacher or go and tell mommy or daddy, and they will step in and solve the problem for you. That's the way life is. You don't solve your problem. You just announce what the problem is to somebody who has enough authority to solve it. Life isn't like that. And there are times in life when we do have to involve a third party, but that's not the basic situation. And people who rely on that tend to be very weak people. Okay, I'd like to say a little bit about one of the techniques that is very, very important in dealing with your children, and that is touch. There's nothing more fundamental in communication than touch. This is the way that we communicate with a newborn. They don't understand words, but they understand touch. And they begin to sense that when somebody cuddles them and hugs them, this is a friendly universe out there, and this person is communicating love. As children get older, they learn words. And the tendency for so many parents is to communicate solely through words, especially when the kids get out of the toddler stage. When they're toddlers, I mean, there's nothing more irresistible than a 3 or 4 year old who wants to crawl up in your lap, as my grandkids do every time they come to see me and want to have me read them a story or tell them a story, and they want to give you a hug and you want to give them a hug. But when a child gets about, I don't know, 9 or 10 years old, they start to get kind of gangly and they're not quite as cuddly, and they don't seem to demand hugging and cuddling quite so much. And the tendency is to kind of back away and not touch them so much. And I think this is a mistake. I think even though they don't overtly seem to be asking for hugs, they need hugs desperately. I don't know what the recommended daily allowance of hugs is, but it's just like with vitamins. There is a recommended daily allowance, and I don't care what the age is. I think that an 80-year-old needs hugs just as much as an 8-year-old. And this is one of the things that they have learned, by the way, in nursing homes the last few years, that people in those situations need hugs. Doesn't matter who it is. Well, you know, it's nice if it's somebody that you know very well and all that, but even if it's just an attendant or a nurse who just kind of gives you a little hug once in a while, or maybe not actually a hug, but a touch on the shoulder or on the arm, these things communicate love and affection, and there's something deep inside of us, deeper than language, which is this communication through touch. And this, by the way, is one of the reasons why I think it's a good idea to find alternatives to spanking. some kids grow up, the only time they're touched is when they've done something bad, when they get either a spanking or a shaking. Don't you ever do that again. And they begin to associate touching with negative feelings. And those people, sometimes when they're adults, have problems as a result of that. Well, this is very unfortunate. I was giving a seminar, the last seminar I gave, by the way, one woman said, "I've just got to give you a testimonial on this hugging thing." She said, when I was about 13, she said, I remember so clearly, I announced to my parents that I didn't want them to hug me anymore. I was getting too old for that, and I wish they'd just knock it off. But she said, as I was saying that, I remember so clearly that I was really hoping that they wouldn't pay any attention to me, that they would continue to hug me. And it's natural. I mean, remember that. Your kids need a hug frequently. And by the way, they don't just need hugs when they have done something right. That's fine to give them a hug when you're proud of them and all that. And most of us kind of instinctively do that. But I think they need hugs when they're not very huggable. When a kid is kind of sullen, things are not going right, he's unhappy with what's going on in his life, and he's kind of withdrawing, that child needs a hug more than ever when you're not inclined to give them a hug. Another time when a child needs a hug is when they have been reprimanded. I think a very good idea when you have to administer a reprimand is kind of a step-by-step process. Number one is to describe what the child did. In other words, you're not accusing the child. You want to avoid accusations. So you say, this place looks like a mess. I've come home and Johnny, you've got your stuff all scattered over the room. It really upsets me. See, that's what we call an I message. In other words, you're talking about your feelings, your emotions. I feel upset. Instead of saying, you are a slob, you have let me down, you are a no good kid, you're saying, I feel very unhappy about what I'm seeing. The I message that some of you are familiar with, that's a very good way to begin a reprimand, letting them know how you feel and what the situation is that you're seeing. What do you see? This room is unacceptable. Then you tell them what needs to be done. It needs to be cleaned up. And if you can avoid doing it in a commanding manner. You know, instead of saying, I want you to get busy right now and do this, it's much better if you can phrase it indirectly and say, this room has to be cleaned up right now. Nobody likes to be ordered and commanded. It's a little thing, but it's one of these little things that the way you phrase something can be quite important, and it can be much less likely to arouse resentment if you say, you know, it's bedtime, instead of saying, get in there and get your pajamas on. The kid wants to get his back up. He's been given an order, or she has been given an order, and they want to find out a way to counteract it. But when you just say, it's bedtime, they're much more likely to accept the fact that it is bedtime. Okay, then when you reprimand a child, after you've told them what needs to be done, it's a good idea to pause for just a moment and look them right in the eye, let it sink in, and then follow it up with a hug. A hug is a way of saying, hey, no hard feelings. I mean, you've kind of messed up and all that, but you're basically a good kid and I still love you, and you give them that little hug. It's hard to do. Some parents find it very difficult to give a child a hug when the child has done something unacceptable. Well, try it, experiment with it. Because, see, what we're doing, it's not just how the child perceives it, it changes your own feelings. And you start to think in terms of, hey, it's a good kid after all, and you know, I'm not writing her off just because of a mistake. I still love her, and I still value our relationship, and sure, I had to correct her, but no hard feelings. Sometimes, instead of a hug or touching, a wink after you've reprimanded a child, we'll say, hey, I understand, no hard feelings. These little things can help to change the climate quite drastically. I think it's very important to spend time alone with each of our children. And when I say time alone, spend time with your children, I know that all of you are saying to yourself, that's easier said than done. If you're living in this busy world that we live in, where maybe both parents work, or maybe it's a one-parent family, you have your hands full, you just don't have time to give a child the attention and time that they maybe should have. Okay, it is hard, but I think you make room for it. I think they should be pretty close to the top of the list. It doesn't take a lot of time, but some time alone with your children as frequently as possible. And time alone doesn't mean time alone with them in front of a television set. that doesn't count. But little things like, if you're going to go shopping, consider having one of your kids go with you. Just that little bit of time, a little chat as you're driving along, so that they can get closer to you, can make quite a difference. I was reading a while back about a fellow in New York who had carried this a step further, and I think this is a wonderful idea, and I really recommend it. He set aside one day a year for each of his children when he was going to spend time only with that child, one-on-one. And they would pick a time. It was not the birthday, because a birthday is a time when you want everybody to get together and your friends and everything. Not that, but just sometime at the convenience of the child and himself. And he had, one of his children was named Jackie. Okay, he had Jackie Day, he had Mary Day, he had Jimmy Day, and there were these 4 days in the year where that day was totally up to the child. He would do anything the child wanted to do. Mother didn't come along and the other kids didn't come along. This was their thing. If they wanted to have something similar, that was up to them. But this was his way of giving each of his children something special. When the children were small, you know, it was a 5 or 6 year old, maybe it would be a day at the zoo or an amusement park or something like that. As they get a little older, maybe going to the theater. Maybe dinner out. He said anything they want to do, as long as the pocketbook holds out, as long as they're not fatigued. But that one day was sacred. Nobody else, and that child had total control. They could do whatever they wanted with it. An interesting idea. I think you might find it worth experimenting with something like that. Time alone with your children. And this gets into the question of making each child feel very special. Each child is special. They are all unique. Children don't sense this. They think of themselves as being one of 5 children or whatever. In a classroom, they're one of 20 or 30 kids. And they think of themselves as being an anonymous speck. You've got to make your children understand that they are unique. In the history of the human race, Mary, there has never been another child quite like you. You are special. You have genes that no other human being has ever had. And you're special. And you have potential that's related to that being special. And we love you because you are special. And you and I have a very special relationship. Kids need to be told that over and over again. You know, what are we doing? We're telling them something that they probably already know, but people need to be told things they already know. This matter of, you know, we talk about love. Your kids know you love them. You shouldn't need to tell them, but you do need to tell them. I'm often reminded of the story I heard about the fellow whose wife was crying unconsolably, and he said, "What's the matter? What's upsetting you so much? What's going on?" She said, "You never tell me that you love me." He said, "Well, for heaven's sakes," he said, "the day we got married, I told you I loved you. Now, if there's any change, I'll let you know." Well, it's that way with our kids. We have to let them know every day. All right, I think that we've covered some of the high spots. We haven't talked about everything, but I recommend, you know, one of the things I've really learned in working with parents is that it's worthwhile to form a group and get together maybe once a week for 6 or 8 weeks and talk about some of your mutual concerns. It can be a parent teachers association, PTA group. It can be within a church, within your nursery school, your day school, or whatever format. You don't need expert counselors, or, you know, I mean, it's nice if you can have somebody come in and give you some presentations, but getting a book that everybody will buy a copy of and going through it a chapter at a time, or getting some tapes and listening to them. But what we're talking about here is a support group. And very often it's not what's in the book or on the tapes that's so important as it is what will come out from the group. And some of the points maybe that you've read that you misunderstood, other people in the group will understand. I've seen a lot of lives dramatically changed by this kind of a support group with parents who have children about the same age as yours, where you just get together and kick around some of these problems that you have and some of the solutions. Some of you may have some questions. Who has a question? All right, one in the back here.
What can you possibly do with a child whose only manner of speaking is whining? I mean, that's the only way he talks.
How old is the child?
He's 5.
5 years old, okay. When a child whines all the time, they've learned that this is a way of getting attention. I think you need to, with a 5-year-old, I think you need to talk to him about what whining is and give him an example, demonstrate asking a question in the usual way and the whining. I would make sure they understand what it is that you don't want them to do. And then I think you should say, it kind of bothers me when you do this. So from now on, I'm not going to hear you when you whine. When you ask me a question, the way we've talked about, then I will hear you. Whining occurs because it works, and it has worked over a period of time. Anything that works, remember we said children's behavior is purposeful. If something works, it will be repeated. If it doesn't work, it won't be repeated. So I think you've got to stop letting that get the attention and the results that the child wants. And you're going to have to be kind of stubborn. You may have to sometimes use the bathroom technique where you just go off by yourself when the whining starts, and the child will understand what you're trying to accomplish. I guarantee that it will work, and it's the only thing that'll work. Okay, do we have any more questions? Yes, right here.
Ed, you've said that it's important that the punishment take place when the infraction occurs, when the child has done something wrong, and not to wait until Daddy gets home kind of thing. But when Daddy gets home, should the child have to tell the father or mother what they've done during the day?
Good question. In the first place, if the punishment that you mentioned, remember we want to avoid punishment if we possibly can. Whatever you do should happen right then, if it's a consequence or whatever. But whatever you do, I think you solve the problem and then that's the end of it. I don't think that he or she should be required to go through this whole thing again when Daddy gets home. You see, what you're doing when you do that, you're building up a sense of guilt. Daddy comes home and Mother says, okay, I want you, Johnny, I want you to come over here and you tell your daddy about that terrible thing you did this morning. Well, Johnny realizes that, boy, this has been on your mind for a long time and it's probably going to be on your mind for a long time in the future, and he begins to feel very guilty. He's never going to be able to wipe the slate clean. He explains it and then he gets another scolding or a lecture or something. And on the other hand, I think if you deal with it promptly and then the case is closed. You shut the door, okay, that's that. It's very important that children learn that they don't have to carry a big sack of guilt around with them through life. That once they have cleaned up the mess they made, then that's fine. That's ancient history, and from now on, they're starting from scratch. The slate is clean. Make them feel that, and don't bring up these kinds of things that happened back in the past. Okay, any more questions? Yes?
I'd like some further recommendations on how to handle that power struggle situation. You talked about that as one of the 4 areas, but I guess I missed how to deal with it.
Okay. The power struggle is a win-lose situation. You're saying, I'm going to win and you're going to lose. The way you handle it is to avoid getting into a power struggle in the first place. Anytime you say to the child, in effect, you have got to back down, I'm right and you're wrong, even if you win, so you've got a loser. Every time you have a winner in a power struggle, you have a loser. And this creates further problems on down the line. I think you have to ask yourself, what's going on here? What are the alternatives? How could we negotiate something? Am I listening to the child? And by the way, you probably aren't. If you ask any teenager, what's the one thing about your parents that you really would like to change? What's wrong? They'll say, my parents don't listen to me. But if you ask the parents, they'll say, well, I do too listen. I mean, anytime he wants to speak up, he's allowed to. I don't make him shut up. I let him have his say. Yeah, you let him have his say, but you're not really listening to him. You're not looking at it from his standpoint. You're not putting yourself in his shoes because you know the answer and he doesn't. And so you let him mouth off while you're thinking about something else, and then when you hit the floor, you come in again. The listening skill is so important. I remember an incident in my own life when my daughter, Becky, was about 14 years old, and I can't remember the exact circumstances, what it was we were arguing about, but she wanted desperately to do something, and we had absolutely decided no. Well, we argued, and finally she stomped off into her room, and slammed the door. A couple of hours later, I went in the kitchen, and there was a letter from Becky. And she said, or it was addressed to the two of us. She said, you weren't listening to me, and this is the only way I know to communicate with you. And she, I don't know, it was about an 8-page letter of all the reasons why she was right and we were wrong. And when we read it, we realized she had a lot of valid objections. I mean, what she said was true. And we hadn't been listening. And it made me realize how you think you're listening and you're really not hearing. What you're doing here, see, you're saying, I realize that your objections are valid, that there may be something that I'm not aware of, and I'm willing to talk about it and negotiate, and maybe if I give in and you give in, we can come up with something. And so often, with that attitude, you get constructive suggestions from the child. It's amazing. Okay, another question.
How do you know when a child needs counseling?
Well, that's a very good question. I have a friend who is a child psychiatrist who has a very simple answer to that, and I think this is probably a pretty good indication. He has a rule of thumb. He says a child's life is divided into 3 compartments. His relationship within the family, his relationship with his parents. Secondly, his school. And third, his relationship with his peers, the other kids that he plays with. If a child is having problems in any one of those 3 areas, parents, school, or peers, you want to give attention to that problem, but it's probably no major crisis because the child's self-esteem is usually not going to be at risk. The child may not be getting very good grades, but he's got a good, warm, loving, cooperative relationship with his parents or her parents, and gets along fine with other kids. That child feels pretty good about himself or herself. When a child has problems in 2 of those 3 areas, this is a borderline situation. You might want to consider the possibility of getting some intervention by a third party, whether it's a psychologist or a school counselor, a minister, maybe some kind of a group for the parent, a parent training group of some kind, some kind of outside intervention you might want to consider. It's kind of a borderline situation. But when you have a child who is having problems in all 3 areas, you have a child whose self-esteem is seriously at risk. And the intervention of someone outside the family who has some skill in counseling can be a very useful thing in that kind of a situation. You need someone who's a little bit more objective, who can look at what's going on, and maybe it's not basically a problem between parent and child, but maybe between parent and parent. Maybe, you know, there are a lot of things that can be involved that may not appear on the surface. Let me just wind this up by saying that there are a lot of disadvantages to having kids. I mean, babies smell, they wake you up at the wrong time, they cry when you want to sleep. I know some of you have toddlers, and you're at your wit's end. They're putting a lot of stress on your life because of their insatiable demands. Let me just say that as time goes on, you're going to find that you will learn to accommodate those demands. Those of you who have teenagers, you're going to find there's often a kind of a rough period as they become a little rebellious and begin testing their independence. But that passes. There are a lot of negatives with kids, but the positives are so tremendous. Let me say that there is nothing in the world, nothing in your life that will begin to compare with your relationship with your kids. And you form a bond with those kids that is indescribable, a bond of love that is hard to put into words, but it all harkens back to what we're here for today, which is asking yourself, what are the things I can do to make our relationship a little bit better? And I guarantee you can. I think that winds it up. I want to thank you all for your patience. And I want to just make one request. When you get home, I wish you'd give all of your kids a great big hug. Thank you very much.
Thank you for watching How to Raise Happy, Confident Kids with Ed Bliss. If you would like to share the benefits of a Career Track seminar with the members of your company or organization, you can have a customized program presented live at your location in any length, from 1 hour to a full day. For details, call our on-site department toll-free at 1-800-325-5854. For a free catalog containing all of Career Track's audio and video programs, call 1-800-334-1018. Thanks for watching, and congratulations on making Career Track your success company.